Good afternoon, everyone. This is Amy Cole at Oregon Housing and Community Services. Could you please let us know in the chat box if you can hear me? Great, thank you. We'll start in a couple of minutes. All right, good afternoon. We're going to get started. This is Amy Cole from Oregon Housing and Community Services, and in the room with me is Natasha Detweiler, also from Oregon Housing and Community Services. We are going to start this webinar with information on the Multifamily Energy Program, and Stephanie Birkland is joining us to talk about that program shortly or briefly at the beginning of our webinar today. And just as we go forward, if you could please put your questions in the question box. It's easier for us to see them and answer them if they're there, as opposed to being in the chat box. And we'll check the chat box, but it's just easier for us to keep track of them if they're in the questions box. So, on that note, let's get started. Stephanie, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me, Amy?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. As Amy mentioned, I'm Stephanie Birkland, and I am here on behalf of the OHCS Multifamily Energy Program. And the reason that we are talking with everybody today is to give an overview of this program, as if anybody applying for the LIFT is interested in taking advantage of the energy efficiency incentives OHCS offers, that will also need to be included in your LIFT application. So Amy, if you want to go to the next slide, and I will give an overview of the program. So the program is administered on behalf of OHCS by TRC Energy Services, and the program has been launched as of almost a year. January 2018, the program relaunched. This program did exist at OHCS. It's formerly known as the Low Income Weatherization Program, and many of the components and offerings are similar to that program with some differences. The program does offer cash incentives for energy efficiency upgrades and is available for multifamily rentals, new construction, and existing buildings. So the program offers incentives for in-unit and also common area improvements. And there is a list of the measures that are offered in our program handbook, which is available on our website. And I will be sure to show the website link towards the end of this. And the program is also available for NOFA and non-NOFA applicant projects. So just a note, most people on this call are probably going for the current NOFA for LIFT, but it is also available for projects that are not going for the NOFA. So please feel free to reach out to our staff anytime, and we're happy to talk about the details there. Next slide, please. So just an overview of what the funding availability looks like for the program. There is $7 million in incentives currently through the program. There are about just shy of $2 million currently reserved in the program. So as you can see, there's lots of incentives to be administered, and we're here and happy to help serve your projects. The two electric territories that this program serves are Portland General Electric and Pacific Power, and the funding is allocated with about a 50-50 split there. And this program, there is a cap to the number of incentives per project. That's at $200,000. Any project that is coming in above that for these incentives is evaluated on a case-by-case basis. So once again, please contact our staff, and we're happy to talk you through that. Next slide, please. Thank you. So eligibility requirements, pretty straightforward. As I mentioned, this is for new and existing multifamily projects that have at least 5 or more attached units. And there's no limit on the number of units in the project, and we do serve projects that are high-rise and low-rise also. So the tenant requirement is that at least 50% of the units are at or below 80% area median income, and they must remain that way for 10 years. And this requirement is slightly different than what is required in the LIFT, but it is it matches projects that meet this and also applying for LIFT. This covers that, no problem. There is a caveat to the program that, as I mentioned before, it is served by 2 of the electric service territories. So projects must be heated by a hardwired electrical heating system in order to qualify for the program. So your base heating has to be hardwired electrical, and the program is allowed to incentivize electric savings measures only currently at this time. And there's also minimum efficiency requirements, and that depends on the pathway that is chosen for the program. So in the next slide, go over, I'll talk about those pathways in just a minute, but wanted to give everyone a heads up that in order to apply for the energy program and include your incentive reservation in your NOFA application, your application packages do need to be to the Oregon Multifamily Energy staff no later than January 2nd. We fully realize that the holidays are fast approaching, and this is right after the new year. So if you are applying for the program and have not already gone through and done an incentive reservation through the Multifamily Energy Program, please do reach out to our staff as soon as possible, and we're happy to help you accomplish the steps in order to get an incentive reservation. And next slide, please. Great, thank you. So I just wanted to give a really high-level overview of what the program looks like. There are 3 different pathways that projects can choose, and the incentives do escalate to reward more comprehensive design strategies. So the pathway 1, which is called our menu pathway, this is looking at just selecting 2 or more measures from a menu of preset options. The second pathway is called bundled, and here we've set predefined bundle packages for additional savings. There's also something called build your own bundle, which allows you to pick and choose measures that can be included in that. And lastly, the whole building pathway. This is really the most comprehensive offering of the program and does offer the maximum incentives possible. Pathway 1 and 2, menu and bundled, do not require energy modeling, whereas Pathway 3 does. So if your project is in the very early stages, which I understand most of your projects might be, please do contact our staff and we're happy to work with you. A lot of times we do have projects that apply for the bundled pathway because they have a general sense of what their scope might be, but are not quite ready to commit to the whole building pathway. And you are able to switch pathways after your project has moved a little bit farther along, as long as there's ample funding in the program. Next slide, please. Thank you. And this is just a really quick overview of what the participation process is. Really, the first step is to reach out to our program team. And the next slide, I will, not quite ready to go to it yet, but we will have our website and a link to the interest form on there. So you can fill that out and our program staff will contact you to discuss your project and what is needed to ultimately reserve incentives for your project. So the whole process, the timeline depends on the project, and we're here to help you kind of move through it and be a resource for you. And next slide, please. Great. So if you are interested in applying for energy efficiency incentives through this program, as I mentioned, we ask that you go on the website and fill out an interest form at OregonMultifamilyEnergy.com, and one of our program staff will follow up with you. And if you have already received an incentive reservation earlier in this year, and it is still valid, that is also good for this next LIFT application that Amy and her staff are going to be talking about today. So Amy, I will, if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them now. Otherwise, I will be on for the duration of the call, and I'm happy to take them at the end if that works. And here's our contact information, phone, website, and email. And once again, this is Stephanie Berkland. I'm the program manager, and our technical manager is Mecca Abraham. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. So you can submit questions about this program if you'd like through the webinar question area. And I think we'll just move forward now with the rest of the presentation. We'll move to the LIFT webinar as soon as I get it up on the sharing website here.
It shows up here.
I need to All right, we're going to move forward talking about the LIFT program and the LIFT NOFA for our current open NOFA. And here we go. All right, this is the agenda, just a high-level outline of what we'll be talking about today. We're in the welcome session right now, and then we'll move on to dates to remember. We'll do a little overview of LIFT and talk about different parts of the application submission, then go to general reminders and questions. And you can submit questions as we go through the presentation, and then we'll also take questions at the end. And we're glad that you all have joined us today to talk about this open NOFA, and hopefully you'll get your questions answered and we'll get our information out to you. All right, so we're just going to start with important dates to remember for this NOFA, and also how to get us your questions after the webinar is over. FAQs are live, frequently asked questions are live on the website. We posted our first round of them last Friday, and we will be posting additional FAQs on a regular basis. Our goal is to do it once a week, but I'm not going to make any promises today. But we hope to do it. Our goal is to get them up once a week. So questions should be submitted to the mfnofa@oregon.gov inbox. And please include in your subject LIFT NOFA question, because we do have more than one NOFA open right now. That's a multifamily NOFA. We'll accept questions through that process until January 9th. And of course, applications are due January 18th, and that's a Friday. This slide talks about how much funding is available. There's $20.9 million available through this NOFA process, and the set-asides are $12.7 million for rural areas and $8.1 million for urban areas. And you'll remember some funding for urban areas was forward committed last time in the last round, so that's why the numbers for the available funds look like this. As a reminder, and if you're new to the project, LIFT eligible projects are new construction or conversion of existing non-housing structures. Acquisition and rehab is not eligible through this program. Okay, so we're going into our definitions a little bit, and eligible projects are in rural areas. This is the same definition of rural that we have been using at least since the last round of LIFT, but I think for quite a while. It might look different because we've tried to clean it up a little, but the definitions are the same. So rural areas are all communities outside the Portland urban growth boundary. And if a community is within a metropolitan statistical area, populations of 15,000 or less are considered rural. For communities not within an MSA and not within the Portland urban growth boundary, 40,000 or less for population is considered rural. And then, of course, urban areas of the state are all the parts of the state that are not considered rural. So this year we've added some additional definitions, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but I just wanted to make you aware that they are in the application. Because of our focus of serving communities of color through this funding, we have added some additional definitions to help clarify what we mean by serving communities of color, and information about culturally responsive organizations and services and culturally specific organizations. And those definitions come from the Protocol for Culturally Responsive Organizations, and that's noted in the NOFA. Okay, funding request limits. These have not changed from the last round. Maximum of $75,000 per unit for projects in urban areas, $125,000 per unit in rural areas, and $100,000 per unit for scattered site projects. And scattered site projects are in both rural and urban areas. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about the affordability for LIFT. A minimum of 20 years affordability for projects. If a project is using 4% tax credits, then it's a minimum of 30 years affordability. And LIFT loans can be satisfied through repayment at the end of the affordability period, or they can be, the loan can be satisfied by extending the affordability period for another 20 or 30 years, depending on what your original affordability period was. All LIFT units have to be affordable to households earning at or below 60% of area median income, but can also be lower than 60% area median income. Okay, we're going to talk about construction standards a little bit for LIFT. We allow both traditional and alternative methods of construction. We're looking at innovation, of course, because it's the local innovation and fast track program. We would like to see quality construction, of course, and construction that can balance the cost of the building with the ongoing cost of operation. So durability, we're looking for 30-year standards. And just a reminder, if other public funding or operating subsidies are used in financing the project, those requirements for those programs have to be followed, of course, in addition to LIFT requirements. Okay, some general underwriting guidelines. The minimum debt service DCR is 1.2. There's a 7% use a standard 7% vacancy rate, 2% escalation of rents, and 3% escalation for expenses. Capitalized operating reserve of 6 months for operating expenses and debt service. And the replacement reserve is $450 per unit per year. Prior to closing, a phase 1 will be required, although it's not required at application. And of course, before closing, all projects will need to meet BOLI compliance if applicable. And as I said before, if there are other subsidies or public capital used, the project will need to meet those requirements as well. This is all, of course, in the NOFA. This is how we get to the developer fee. This is the calculation that's used. So I'm just putting it up there to show people. Okay, a resident services plan is also required, and there will, of course, be compliance monitoring on the development once it's built and occupied. Okay, so this year we have two documents that make up two types of documents that make up the NOFA. The NOFA itself and application documents. Excuse me. This year we have integrated the NOFA instructions into the application documents. So in prior years there were 3 kinds of documents associated with the NOFA, but this year there are only 2. Okay, now we're going to start going through the submissions. We'll start with part 1. So Yes.
Do you want to, I have a couple questions.
Sure.
Before we, well, there's one question, I think. So one question that we have right now is that, is it okay if they have a few 80% units in the project as long as they are paid for by a different funding source?
Yes, that's fine.
Yes. Okay. I thought other people might want to hear the
Yes.
answer.
Yes.
And then is the resident services plan due with the application?
No, that's due before closing. That's a requirement of the reservation letter.
Great. Thank you. Those are the questions we've gotten so far that aren't project specific that I'm.
Okay, great. Thanks, Natasha.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so for the part one, which is the preliminary submission review, there's a cover sheet, an authorization and acceptance form, board of directors resolution, if that applies to your organization. You need to submit a copy of organizational documents. And new this year, we have a diversity, equity, and inclusion agreement that is required for all applicants. This is an agreement that says organizations will work toward incorporating more elements of diversity, equity, and inclusion, both within their organization and for the people that they serve, and interacting and serving people through their housing. And then the last part of this part one is the ever popular application submission checklist. Popular on our side because it makes it easier for us to review applications, and popular probably on your side because it helps you keep track of what you've got in your application. Oh, I already talked about this. As I said, the DEI form commits to working toward diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we, just a few words about that, we realize that all organizations will be at different places in implementing diversity, equity, and inclusion within their organization and in their services to their residents. But this is our way of encouraging moving forward on that. And so know that we do not expect every applicant to have incorporated all of the elements of this agreement. It's just saying that you're willing to work toward that. Okay. Part two is the project and applicant and project worksheet. So this is a pretty long form, and it has information on the project and the applicant, the development team, types of units that will be developed, funding for those units, target populations for the development, and information about the site and building. And this information, just as an aside, is one of the pieces of information that we give to our external review committee. So it's really important to fill this out completely and to fill it out in a way that reviewers can use it to get a good idea of what your project is going to be and who it's serving. And as it says here, we recommend that your answers be accurate and thorough. And of course, I'm sure you agree with that too. The project eligibility form, we're going into part three, tells us whether your project is in a rural area or an urban area. And that's, of course, because we score rural projects together and urban projects together. And you'll also tell us if it's a scattered site project. Okay. 3.2 is readiness to proceed. This is going to be information about zoning and site control. Additionally, you'll let us know if you have any federal resources for your project. You'll give us your development schedule and your project site checklist is part of this as well. And different than past years, this year we are not conducting site visits up front for LIFT. This is for LIFT, and I'm only speaking to LIFT, not to other agency programs when I talk about this. But we will decide after those submissions are made if we feel like we need to do a site visit. But when the site review checklist comes in, it's self-certified this year. Okay. 3.3 is development team capacity. So there's a worksheet that talks about experience of the development team. And if there is an area on this worksheet that no one on your team has experience in or capacity, we'd like you to explain what your team is doing to mitigate any risks associated with that lack of capacity or experience. Real estate holdings will just tell us all about the real estate holdings that the sponsor has. And so we'd like information about that. That helps us see what other sorts of work the sponsor has been involved in. 3.4, that's the pro forma. So we need one version of a pro forma submitted, please, with your application. We ask you to explain your financial assumptions. We don't require an appraisal or market study at submission. So that will be before closing that we would require that. And then there's an architectural submission with a map and some context photos and information about the site and what's around the site. And then we ask for your construction hard cost estimate as well. 3.5 is a LIFT agreement commitment. It basically says that if awarded funds, you will comply with LIFT requirements. And 3.5A is submission if you need board approval for that, if your organization requires board approval to sign this form. Okay, homeownership integrity. We just want to know that your organization does not have a conviction of fraud, is not in bankruptcy, and has not been debarred. Okay, 3.7, if you are planning to use 4% tax credits with LIFT and for the project, you'll need to fill out the 4% pre-app and submit it with your application. And section 1.5, it says see section 1.5, that's the checklist, and 3.7 is the pre-app materials, are the pre-app materials that you'll need to fill out.
And we just got a question whether the pro forma is the same for the LIFT application and the 4% pre-application, and the answer is yes. So you only need to fill out the one pro forma and include the 4% and bond amount in that.
Great. Okay. 3.8 is the Oregon Affordable Housing Tax Credit application. If you're planning to use that resource, you'll need to fill out those application materials and turn them in with your project application as well. And along with the 4% tax credit information on the pro forma, there's also a section to fill out information for OAHTCs. And we just heard from Stephanie about the multifamily energy program. Here's where it can be found on our website. Okay, now we're going to talk about everyone's favorite part, competitive scoring. And thanks you guys for hanging in there. We're getting close to the end of our the presentation part of this webinar. So I really appreciate you wading through all these many slides. Okay, 4.1 is the competitive scoring section of the application. So it uses information that has been submitted through other parts of the application, and then there are sections to fill out as well. So this competitive scoring questionnaire is used for both internal and external scoring panels. And this is just kind of a high-level overview of the point structure, and we'll go through it in more detail over the next few slides. Okay. So I tried to break these into categories that would make sense, but I have another section where each category is broken out by itself. But this kind of gives you information about how we score these sections and where the information from your application comes from. So list subsidy and project costs. We look at information submitted on the 4.1 questionnaire, and we verify information against your project pro forma, and that's scored internally by a scoring committee internally. Readiness to proceed is based on the readiness questionnaire, which is 3.2 of your submission, and that's scored by our underwriting staff. Service to communities of color and MWESB, that's based on information submitted on the 4.1 questionnaire, and that is scored by an external scoring committee. Financial viability is based on your financial submissions, so the pro forma and your financial assumptions, and that's also scored by our underwriting staff. Lower rents and using the HUD 811 PRA program, that's based on your narrative submissions and whether you are choosing to use HUD 11 PRA as part of your project. Okay, so innovation of efficiency and replicability, and I'll talk about this a little more. We've changed the scoring on this question a bit because we felt like it would be better to split each of those things, to split those three areas apart and offer points for each of them, because many times a project cannot do all three, but it can do two of the three or one of the three, and we wanted it to be easier for applicants to understand that and to use whichever of these three apply to their project best. Let's see. Capacity is based on information submitted in the 4.1 questionnaire, and it's scored also through our asset management and compliance team and the external scoring committee. And then scattered site points, that's just if you're doing a scattered site project or not, and those are bonus points. Okay, we have some tips for your responses in the 4.1 questionnaire. Because much of this information is used by our external scoring committee, just don't assume that the reader is familiar with your organization or your project. We use different people every time on our scoring committees, so they may be familiar with your organization based on what they do for their work life, but they may not be. So, just make sure that you get your information in a way that someone who's not familiar at all can understand what you're doing. And just a reminder that external reviewers don't have access to your whole application. They will just have some parts of it to look at and on which to base their scoring. One great tool to help introduce your project and your organization to the review team is there's a project description area in Form 2.0, and if you can use that to give a general overview of your project, that's really useful to reviewers. Make sure and explain acronyms, because sometimes we are not all we're using the same acronym to describe different things, so it's very helpful if you'll explain your acronyms. And as I said, not all reviewers will be familiar with your organization, they may or may not be subject area experts. We will have definitely subject area experts, but not the entire panel may not be. So just keep that in mind while filling out 4.1. So this breaks it down per question. This is also, all of this point structure is in the NOFA as well. I probably do not need to go through it all again, since we already talked about what the scoring is based on, but it's just another way to look at the scoring. And same with this is the second part of that. Okay, general reminders. We're almost there. We're in the home stretch, guys. The original application should be single-sided, but your copies can be double-sided. And please ensure that each copy that is submitted, we require an original, 2 copies, and an electronic copy. Please make sure that each copy is complete and includes all the same documents as the original. Sometimes we get the copies in and they're incomplete. We're distributing copies to different people, and we really need them to all be complete so that reviews can be done in the most efficient manner possible. Please make sure your application is signed. And it's really helpful, as I mentioned before, if the application's checklist is followed in terms of the order in which you submit the application. So you submit the parts of the application, makes it easier for us on this side. And then if you follow the application checklist, it will likely make it easier for you too, because you know that you've included all the attachments and things. It's really helpful if divider tabs are used when you submit your application. Then it's a lot easier for us to find things as we're reviewing. And it's also useful if every page of the application is numbered. Some more reminders. Please keep your responses within the stated length and font size of the application, and please use single spacing. We already talked about acronyms. Please answer questions completely. We talked about that too. Please submit only the documents and attachments that are listed in each section and are included on the checklist. And please make sure to mark project location on maps and in context photos. As I said, you'll submit an original 2 copies and an electronic copy of the application. They need to be received here at OHCS by 4 o'clock on January 18th. If your application is postmarked but not in our office by that time, unfortunately, we will not be able to review it. It will be rejected. And just a reminder of our address here in Salem. And once again, just any questions can be submitted to, oops, this is the wrong one. It should say Multifamily NOFA, MF NOFA, as you all know, because we've definitely been getting questions in, and we'll post them. Last day for submitting questions is January 9th, and application is due January 18th. And before we go to questions, I just want to acknowledge that we know that using the application pages this year, it has been a little bit of a challenge. We went to a Word template this year, which is different. There have been issues in the past with formatting and things like that, and we were hoping that this would help with that.
And I think it does.
And it does, but there are some other issues that there are always unintended consequences, I think, is what we've learned. But if you are finding some of the templates hard to work with and you need help, please send an email to the mfnofa@oregon.gov website with the form attached, and let us know what issues you're having, and we'll work with you one-on-one and help you work that out. And I also just wanted to mention, I've had a couple of questions about the timing of our NOFA release and the application due date. And we know that the timing is not optimal. It's over holidays for many people. And unfortunately, we can't extend the deadline because we have to meet a bond sales deadline for these funds. So I just wanted to let everyone know that that's why the timing is the way it is, and we totally understand and empathize that it is not the most ideal timing, but we want to get the money out there, and we want those bonds to be sold so that housing can get on the ground and that we can fund your projects. All right. Do we have a lot of questions?
No.
Oh.
Does anybody have any questions? Okay, so what is the bond sale deadline? So what that means is these are these Article 11Q bonds, and in order to get DAS to sell the bonds, we need to demonstrate that we are able to commit all of the resources from that bond sale. And I believe the bonds are scheduled to be sold right at the start of February. So we need the applications in. We need to have done at least administrative and threshold review in order to give them that assurance, essentially. So that's what informs what set that January 18th deadline for the NOFA submissions. Was that gives us a weekish to get a lot of that due diligence done and for DAS. So that's one question. So there's another question here. It says, this is the sample resolution. Some of these might have also come in that you'll see in the FAQs. The sample resolution, the board resolution, the question is, it looks like there's some confusing language. I think we've determined that it's legalese, and you don't need to necessarily structure your board resolution entirely the same. Is that?
Yes, and that's a sample, but basically what we need you to do is...
Yes, you can edit it.
Yeah, you can edit it, sure. Yep, no problem on that. It's a sample language.
So here's a question. For rural projects, do a certain number of units in the project need to be identified for communities of color in order to get full points?
No, that would be, again, that would violate fair housing law. So you do not need to designate specific units, but in your services and in your project design, we want you to be doing outreach to communities of color, and when you are leasing units, we want to be sure that you are reaching out to those who are the least likely to apply and least likely to know about the housing opportunity.
Okay, here's the next question. Can you talk about site control specifically? If our city has site control and they have agreed to partner with us, would that meet the eligibility?
You'd need to have something in writing, either an off, well, so it depends. If they're leasing you the property, then we'd want to see a copy of the lease, right? If you're getting
or
or
a lease
something.
agreement, something
Yeah,
that
something.
outlines the terms and duration of your agreement with.
Mm-hmm. And if they're selling it to you, we'd like to see a purchase agreement.
Okay, so here's a question. Is someone reading the MF NOFA questions each day? Are the questions we need resolved being worked on? For example, incorrect formulas in the pro forma.
Yes, they're being read every day, and yes, we did get your question about that, and a response is forthcoming.
Yeah, and functionally what really happens is Amy and folks pull the questions together, and we have a meeting every couple days to discuss the ones that are questions that are kind of submitted. Yeah. And then and they're divided up, kind of try to be systematic about this. And you'll get an individual response to your email, and then it's kind of sanitized and put into the FAQ document. And just FYI for everybody, on the summary page of the pro forma, the total development costs are not calculating correctly, and that is something that we thought had been fixed, but it was not. But it doesn't actually influence this NOFA because we don't. The only application that uses that total development cost is our 9% tax credit one. So it is incorrect. We will update formulas, but we can do that after your pro formas are submitted. So we're not going to plan to reissue the pro forma.
Right, and that summary page is the first or second tab on the pro forma, and it grabs the information from the pages behind it. So, and as Natasha said, that metric is not used for LIFT, so so we're not going to be reissuing the pro forma at this point.
And that's all the questions that I see here. Are there any? Does anybody want to? Can you provide more clarification under the scoring for efficiency in question number 7 of section 4.1? Is this meant to refer to the efficiencies in the financing process or building design process? And I think the answer is that it could be anything. There's no one piece that efficiency or replicability is really talking about. It's really
how you want to interpret it for your project. So, yeah, there's hardly ever a wrong answer.
Yeah.
So yes, for innovation as well, it's how you want to interpret it for your project.
So for the purposes of the soft set aside on a scattered site project, how do you allocate the rural funding amount from the urban funding amount? And the way that we have done this in the past is that we would, when it comes to actually pulling funds out together, we would do that on a
pro rata basis.
Yeah, on a pro rata basis. So if 60% of your units are in urban, we'd pull 60% of the resources from urban and the balance from rural. So trying to be true to where those come from. I have another question here. Okay, to clarify the site control question, if the city agreed to a 30-year lease of the property, would that meet the eligibility?
Yes.
As long as, I would say it needs to have be renewable in conjunction with if you're planning to do extended affordability versus repayment.
I agree.
Does that make sense?
Yep. And the other thing is, yes, it needs to match the length of the term of the loan you're asking for. That's another way to say that.
Yeah. Anybody else?
And while we're waiting to see if there are more questions submitted, these questions will also be added to the FAQs. So we'll be putting the answers in writing and putting them, posting them as part of the FAQs for this week.
Okay. Can you use an option agreement for site control?
Yes.
Yes.
The panel here says yes.
Therefore it is. Okay, anybody else? Just say Amy says hello. Okay.
All right. Anyone else have questions?
Okay, RS means pricing isn't very accurate for adaptive reuse. How should we handle this?
I'm not sure for adaptive reuse. I hope that it is not acquisition rehab of residential, but you're considering doing conversion from non-residential to residential if it's an existing building.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to handle that. I mean, I'm not really sure. We have RS means as a standard in the NOFA. We have to use that, but I think if it is not fitting with your project well, then you need to add a narrative that talks about that.
Yeah.
And let us know why. Let us know your approach and how you got to your numbers, and talk about why RS means is not being compatible with your project.
Yeah, and she's confirmed it's conversion of commercial property. There's seismic improvements, historic issues, etc. But yeah, I think the best option is to. I mean, there's not going to be a really comparable building type, but include in their explanations about it. Any other questions?
All right. So we seem, from our perspective, we've answered all the questions that have come in today, and we really appreciate you joining us for the webinar today, and look forward to hearing further questions from prospective applicants and working with you on this program. So thanks again, and we look forward to working with you.